I was elbow deep in engine grease when I saw the white sedan crawling up my driveway like a predator stalking prey. My 1978 Ford pickup had been giving me trouble all morning, and the last thing I needed was some salesperson trying to pitch me solar panels or religion. The car stopped about 20 feet from my barn, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd just stepped out of a country club luncheon, complete with pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. "Are you Peter Whitmore?" she called out, not bothering to get any closer to where actual work was being done. I wiped my hands on a rag and squinted at her through the Montana sun. "Depends on who's asking." "I'm Margaret Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." She said it like she was announcing royalty. "We need to discuss your property." I felt my stomach drop. 6 months ago, a developer had bought up the land adjacent to my family's farm and thrown up a cookie-cutter subdivision faster than you could say urban sprawl. My great-grandfather's 160-acre cattle farm was now surrounded on 3 sides by houses that all looked identical, painted in shades of beige that made me want to scream. The 4th side backed up to state forest land, which was the only thing keeping me sane. "What about my property?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. Margaret pulled out a manila folder from her oversized purse and started walking toward me, her sensible heels clicking on the gravel. "It has come to our attention that your land is actually part of the Meadowbrook Heights development boundaries. We've been trying to reach you for weeks." "The hell it is," I said, my voice flat. "My family has owned this land since 1889. We were here long before your McMansions showed up." She smiled in that way people do when they think they know something you don't. "I'm afraid the county records show otherwise. According to the plat maps filed with the development, your property was included in the annexation. You're in violation of approximately 47 HOA bylaws, and we need to address this immediately." I stared at her, my brain trying to process what she was saying. "Annexation? Lady, nobody annexed anything. This is private property that's been in my family for over a century." Margaret opened her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are certified copies of the county land records. As you can see, your property is clearly within the development boundaries. You should have received notification months ago." I took the papers from her and looked them over. Sure enough, there were maps showing my farmland incorporated into the subdivision boundaries, with little notes about zoning changes and development agreements. My blood started to boil. I never received any notification, and I sure as hell never agreed to join your HOA. "Whether you received notification or not doesn't change the legal reality," Margaret said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my teeth grind. "You're now subject to all HOA rules and regulations. For starters, we need you to remove that barn within 30 days. It's not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of our community." I looked at the 100-year-old barn that my great-grandfather had built with his own hands, the same barn where my father had taught me how to work on engines, where I'd spent countless hours as a kid playing in the hayloft. "You want me to tear down my barn?" "It's an eyesore," she said, matter-of-factly. "Also, your fence is the wrong color. You have commercial vehicles parked on the property, and we've had complaints about livestock odor. The cattle need to go." "The cattle are my livelihood. This is a working farm." Margaret shook her head like she was explaining something to a child. "Not anymore. The land is zoned residential now. Livestock aren't permitted. You'll need to remove them within 60 days. Also, you owe approximately $18,000 in back HOA dues, plus late fees and penalties." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. $18,000? "The monthly dues are $250. We've calculated back to when the annexation was finalized, which was 11 months ago. With late fees and penalty assessments, the total comes to $18,472. She pulled out another piece of paper. "Here's your invoice." I didn't take it. "I'm not paying you a damn dime, and I'm not tearing down my barn or getting rid of my cattle. You can take your HOA and shove it." Margaret's expression hardened. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand this is inconvenient, but the law is the law. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property. Eventually, we can foreclose and force a sale to recover the debts owed." "Get off my land," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said get off my land, right now, before I call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing." Margaret's face flushed red. This is exactly the kind of attitude we've come to expect from people like you. You think because you've been here forever, the rules don't apply to you. Well, they do. You'll be hearing from our attorney. She marched back to her car, threw the folder through the window, and peeled out fast enough to spray gravel everywhere. I stood there holding the papers, my hands shaking with anger. I went inside my farmhouse and immediately called my neighbor, Jack Sorensen, who'd been a real estate attorney before he retired. He lived in one of the subdivision houses, which was how I'd met him. Despite being part of the HOA, he was a good guy who'd helped me navigate some property tax issues the year before. Jack, I need your help. The HOA president just showed up claiming they annexed my farm. There was a long pause. What? Pete, that's not possible. Your land has been in your family forever. That's what I said, but she's got county records showing my property inside their development boundaries. Don't sign anything and don't agree to anything. I'm coming over. Jack arrived 30 minutes later, and I spread all the papers Margaret had given me across my kitchen table. He put on his reading glasses and started going through them methodically, his face getting more serious with each page. This is bad, Pete, he finally said. How bad? They've somehow gotten the county to refile the plat maps for the development. According to these documents, your property was included in a blanket annexation when the developer got approval for the subdivision. The problem is, you should have been notified. There's supposed to be a hearing process, notice requirements, the whole 9 yards. I never got any notice, nothing. The first I heard about any of this was when Margaret showed up today. Jack pulled out his phone and started making notes. Okay, here's what we need to do. First, we need to pull the original deeds and title records for your property. Second, we need to find out exactly what happened with this annexation. Something doesn't smell right. You can't just annex someone's private property into an HOA without their knowledge or consent. Can they really make me pay $18,000? If the annexation is legal, theoretically yes. But Pete, I don't think this is legal. I think someone either made a mistake or deliberately did something very wrong. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document I had related to my property. My deed was straightforward, passed down through my family since my great-grandfather homesteaded the land in 1889. But then Jack found something interesting in a wooden box where I kept all my grandfather's old papers. Pete, what's this? He held up a yellow document with an official-looking seal. I squinted at it. Not sure. That's just old family stuff. Jack's eyes widened as he read it. Pete, this is a land patent. An original federal land patent signed by President Benjamin Harrison. What's that mean? It means your great-grandfather received this land directly from the federal government under the Homestead Act. A land patent is the highest form of land ownership in the United States. It's basically a deed from the government itself. Pete, this changes everything. How so? Jack was already pulling out his phone. Land patents can't be annexed or absorbed into local jurisdictions without the patent holder's explicit consent. They supersede county and municipal authority in a lot of cases. I need to do some research, but if this is legitimate, and it looks legitimate, your property might be legally immune from HOA annexation. I felt a surge of hope. So I don't have to pay them or follow their rules. Not if this patent is valid. But we need to verify it and then figure out how your land got included in the county records as part of the HOA in the first place. Someone made a serious error, or something much worse happened. Jack left with copies of everything, promising to dive into the research immediately. I tried to get back to work on my truck, but my mind was racing. How had this happened? Who was responsible? And what was I going to do if the HOA actually tried to take my farm? 2 days later, I got my answer in the form of a certified letter from the law firm of Davidson and Associates representing the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. The letter was 5 pages of legal jargon that basically said I had 30 days to comply with all HOA regulations or face legal action. They were demanding immediate payment of the back dues, removal of the barn, removal of all livestock, repainting of fences to approved colors, and about 20 other things that would effectively destroy everything my family had built. I called Jack immediately. I got the letter too, he said. They sent me a copy since I'd reached out to them on your behalf. Pete, we need to move fast. I've been digging into the annexation, and I found something disturbing. What? The public hearing for the annexation was held 9 months ago. According to the records, you were notified by certified mail. I never got anything, Jack. I believe you, but there's a signed receipt showing someone at your address signed for the letter. My mind raced. That's impossible. I'm the only one here. My wife passed 5 years ago. I don't have kids, and nobody else lives on this property. Do you remember being away 9 months ago? Maybe someone else collected your mail? I thought back. 9 months ago would have been August. I'd gone to a cattle auction in Billings, Montana, but that was just a 3-day trip. My neighbor's kid had fed my animals, but I'd taken my mail to the post office to hold. No, I was here. Even when I went to Billings, my mail was held at the post office. Then someone forged the receipt, Jack said grimly, which means this whole annexation might be fraudulent. I'm going to the county clerk's office tomorrow to examine the original documents. In the meantime, I want you to file a complaint with the sheriff's office about the forged receipt. This is potentially mail fraud, which is a federal crime. I drove into town that afternoon and met with Deputy Sheriff Tom Carlson. He was skeptical at first, but when I showed him all the documents and explained that I'd never received the notification, his expression changed. You're saying someone forged your signature on a certified mail receipt? Either that or they signed it themselves. I sure as hell didn't sign it. Tom made copies of everything. I'll need to coordinate with the postal inspector on this. Mail fraud is federal jurisdiction. But if someone falsified documents to make it look like you were properly notified, that's also forgery and fraud at the state level. Give me a few days to investigate. Jack called me that night with more news. Pete, I spent 6 hours at the county clerk's office. The annexation documents are bizarre. Your property is listed, but there's a notation that says you filed a waiver of objection. I didn't file anything. I know. I looked at the waiver document. It's supposedly your signature, but it looks nothing like your actual signature on file with your property deed. Pete, someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like you agreed to join the HOA. Why would anyone do that? That's what we need to find out, but I have a theory. How much is your land worth? I shrugged. I don't know, maybe $1 million? It's 160 acres bordering the subdivision and state forest. Try 5 million, minimum. Probably more like 8 or 10 million in the current market. Developers would kill for land like yours. It's the perfect location for expansion, and with the state forest on one side, it's got protected views that make it even more valuable. The implication hit me like a freight train. You think someone's trying to steal my land? I think someone is trying to manufacture a legal crisis that will force you into foreclosure. If the HOA places a lien on your property for unpaid dues and violations and then forecloses, the property goes to auction. Guess who would be the primary bidder? The developer. Exactly. They'd get your land for pennies on the dollar compared to what they'd have to pay you in a legitimate sale. Pete, I think you're the victim of a land grab scheme. I felt sick. My family's farm, over a century of history, was being targeted by criminals in suits. What do? First, we prove the land patent gives you immunity from the HOA. I've been researching patent law, and there's solid precedent that land patents supersede local zoning and HOA agreements unless the patent holder explicitly subordinates the patent. Second, we expose the fraud and go after everyone involved. I'm talking criminal charges, civil litigation, the works. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The HOA sent another letter demanding immediate payment and compliance. Margaret herself showed up twice more, each time with increasingly aggressive threats about liens and foreclosure. I refused to let her past my gate. Then, Jack made a breakthrough. He'd sent the land patent to a specialist in federal land law at the University of Montana who confirmed that the patent was legitimate and that it gave me something called allodial title, which is basically the highest form of property ownership possible. According to the expert, my land couldn't be annexed into an HOA without my explicit written consent, and any attempt to do so was legally void. Armed with this information, Jack drafted a response to the HOA's attorney. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing that basically said the HOA had no authority over my property, the annexation was fraudulent, and if they continued to harass me, I would sue them into oblivion. He sent it certified mail with all the documentation about the land patent attached. 2 days later, all hell broke loose. I was feeding my cattle early in the morning when I heard vehicles coming up the driveway. 3 trucks pulled up, and out stepped Margaret, a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Gerald Davidson, the HOA's attorney, and 6 guys in work uniforms. "Mr. Whitmore, we're here to begin remediation of the property violations," Margaret announced. "These contractors will be removing the barn as per HOA regulations." I positioned myself between them and my barn. "You're not touching anything on my property. I sent you documentation proving you have no authority here." Gerald Davidson stepped forward, holding his own folder. "Mr. Whitmore, we've reviewed your claim about the land patent. While interesting, it doesn't change the fact that you're bound by current zoning laws and the HOA covenants. The county has authorized this remediation." "The county can authorize whatever they want. I have a federal land patent that supersedes county authority." "That's not how it works," Davidson said smugly. "Land patents are historical documents. They don't grant immunity from current laws and regulations." Jack's car came roaring up the driveway, gravel flying. He jumped out and immediately confronted Davidson. "Gerald, if you touch anything on this property, I'll have you disbarred so fast your head will spin. That land patent is valid and enforceable. Pete's property has allodial title, which means you have no jurisdiction here whatsoever." Davidson looked less confident now. "That's your interpretation, Jack. We have a different legal opinion." "Then take it to court. But if you destroy property based on a void annexation, you're going to be personally liable for damages. And Margaret, I hope your HOA has good insurance, because you're going to need it." Margaret's face went red. "This is ridiculous. Nobody is above the rules. Mr. Whitmore lives in a civilized community now, and he needs to follow the same standards as everyone else." "He doesn't live in your community," Jack shot back. "His property was never legally annexed. You falsified documents to make it appear he consented when he didn't. That's fraud. Margaret, criminal fraud." "How dare you accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. Pete never received notification of the annexation hearing. The certified mail receipt was forged. The waiver of objection was forged. Someone committed multiple felonies to make this annexation appear legitimate." Davidson held up a hand. "Jack, those are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" "The sheriff's office is investigating right now. The postal inspector is involved because of the mail fraud. So yes, there will be proof. And when there is, everyone involved is going to face criminal charges." The contractors were looking nervous now, whispering among themselves. One of them called out, "Hey, we're just hired to do a job. If there's legal issues, we're not getting involved." They started packing up their tools and heading back to their trucks. Margaret tried to stop them, but they weren't interested. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving just Margaret, Davidson, Jack, and me standing in my driveway. "This isn't over," Margaret said icily. "The HOA board will be meeting to discuss our next steps." "You do that," Jack replied. "And while you're at it, you might want to consult with a criminal defense attorney. Because when the investigation is complete, you're going to need one." They left, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Jack, what if they come back when we're not here? What if they try to destroy my barn anyway?" "They won't. Davidson might be aggressive, but he's not stupid enough to commit a crime on camera." Jack pointed to the security cameras I'd installed last year after some equipment went missing. "You've got everything recorded, right?" "Yeah, everything." "Good. Keep recording. Document every interaction. We're building a case." Sheriff Carlson came by that afternoon with a postal inspector named Rebecca Flores. They spent 2 hours interviewing me, looking at documents, and examining the signature on the certified mail receipt. "Mr. Whitmore, I've compared this signature to your actual signatures on file," Inspector Flores said. "They're not even close. Someone definitely forged this receipt. I'll be opening a formal investigation into mail fraud." "What about the waiver document?" I asked. Sheriff Carlson nodded. "That's forgery under state law. I'm opening an investigation too. We need to figure out who had access to these documents and who stood to benefit from the fraud." "The developer," Jack said. "Crestview Development Corporation. They're the ones who built the subdivision, and they're the ones who would benefit from forcing Pete off his land." "We'll look into it," Carlson said, "but these investigations take time." In the meantime, Mr. Whitmore, if anyone from the HOA or the development company tries to enter your property without permission, call 911 immediately. Don't confront them yourself." Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. The HOA placed a lien on my property for the alleged back dues, despite me filing a formal challenge with the county. I received daily letters threatening foreclosure. Margaret organized a community meeting where she told all the subdivision residents that I was a troublemaker who refused to follow the rules and was bringing down their property values. Several of my new neighbors started giving me dirty looks when I drove past. But Jack was building our case too. He'd hired a forensic document examiner who confirmed the signatures were forged. He'd found emails between Margaret and the developer's CEO, a man named Richard Stoll, discussing the Whitmore problem and how to resolve it efficiently. And he'd discovered that Margaret's own property had been sold to her by Crestview Development at a 70% discount right around the time she became HOA president. "She's in on it," Jack told me over coffee at my kitchen table. "Margaret's getting kickbacks from the developer. They gave her a sweetheart deal on her house in exchange for helping them grab your land." "Can we prove it?" "I think so. I've subpoenaed financial records for both the HOA and Margaret personally. I'm also going after Crestview's records. If there's a paper trail, we'll find it." Then Deputy Sheriff Carlson called with news that made my stomach drop. "Pete, we've identified who signed for the certified mail. It was a woman named Linda Morrison. She works as a mail carrier for the Postal Service. One of the regular carriers was on vacation, and Morrison was filling in. According to the postmaster, she signed the receipt herself and then marked the letter as delivered. She never actually attempted delivery to your address. Why would she do that? That's the interesting part. Morrison is married to David Morrison, who's the vice president of sales for Crestview Development. She falsified the delivery records as a favor to help the company's land grab scheme. So we've got them. We've got her dead to rights on mail fraud. That's a federal felony, and we're building conspiracy charges against her husband and potentially others at Crestview. Inspector Flores is talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office about criminal charges." Things moved fast after that. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into Crestview Development, Margaret Henderson, and several others for conspiracy to commit fraud, mail fraud, and forgery. Jack filed a massive civil lawsuit on my behalf seeking damages and the immediate removal of the fraudulent lien. Margaret tried to hold an emergency HOA board meeting to increase the pressure on me, but Jack showed up with a cease and desist order. The judge overseeing our civil case had issued a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any action against my property until the fraud allegations were resolved. I was sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sunset over the mountains when Jack's truck pulled up. He had a huge grin on his face. "Pete, you're not going to believe this. Margaret just resigned as HOA president." "Really?" "Really. Her attorney apparently explained to her exactly how much trouble she's in. Mail fraud alone carries up to 5 years in federal prison. Add in the conspiracy charges, the forgery, the kickbacks from Crestview, and she's looking at serious time if convicted." "What about Crestview?" "Even better, the FBI raided their offices this morning. Turns out your farm isn't the first property they've tried to grab using fraudulent HOA annexations. They've been running this scheme in 3 different states. They find properties they want, create HOA boundaries that include the property, forge documents to make it look like the owner consented, then use HOA violations and liens to force foreclosure. They've stolen over $30 million worth of land from people over the past 5 years. I felt sick thinking about all the other families who'd lost their property. Did they get away with it? Not anymore. The U.S. Attorney is throwing the book at them. Richard Stoll, the CEO, has been arrested. So has David Morrison and 4 other Crestview executives. Linda Morrison, the mail carrier, has already pleaded guilty and is cooperating with prosecutors. And my farm. The county is removing the fraudulent annexation from the records. The lien has been dissolved. And because of the land patent, they've created a special designation for your property that essentially makes it immune from future annexation attempts. Pete, your farm is safe. I couldn't believe it. After months of stress and fear, it was actually over. But Jack wasn't done. There's more. Because this was such a clear case of fraud, and because your land patent gives you special protections, The judge awarded you damages in the civil case. Crestview Development owes you $2 million for emotional distress, legal fees, and attempted theft of property. $2 million? $2 million. And honestly, you deserve every penny. They tried to steal your family's heritage. The criminal trial happened 4 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the courtroom and watching as prosecutors laid out the conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, financial records, testimony from other victims, the forged documents, everything painted a clear picture of a criminal enterprise designed to steal valuable land from unsuspecting property owners. Margaret Henderson pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges in exchange for testifying against the Crestview executives. She received 3 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution to all the victims. Linda Morrison got 2 years for mail fraud. David Morrison got 7 years for his role in organizing the scheme. Richard Stoll, the Crestview CEO, went to trial and was convicted on 23 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay over $40 million in restitution to victims. Crestview Development Corporation was dissolved, its assets seized and sold to pay victims. The new HOA board, elected after Margaret's resignation, sent me a formal letter apologizing for the harassment and acknowledging that my property was never legally part of their jurisdiction. They invited me to a community barbecue as a peace offering. I actually went, and it wasn't terrible. Most of the neighbors were decent people who'd been misled by Margaret's lies. A few even apologized for giving me dirty looks and said they were glad I'd fought back. Jack became one of my best friends through the whole ordeal. We'd get together every few weeks to fish or work on projects around the farm. He'd joke that defending me was the most fun he'd had since retiring from active practice. The settlement money from Crestview sat in my bank account for a while before I decided what to do with it. I used part of it to upgrade my farm equipment and make some repairs I'd been putting off. I donated a chunk to a legal aid organization that helps rural property owners fight unfair development schemes, and I put the rest in a trust to ensure the farm would be protected for future generations, even though I didn't have kids of my own. Eventually, I decided I'd leave it to someone who'd appreciate it and keep it as a working farm. My barn still stands, same as it has for over a century. My cattle still graze on the same land my great-grandfather homesteaded. The fence is still the same color it's always been, and I still park my trucks wherever I damn well please. The subdivision surrounds me on 3 sides, but my property line is clearly marked now, with new signs that read, "Private Property, No HOA Jurisdiction." I kept the original land patent framed on my wall, right next to a photo of my great-grandfather standing in front of the barn he'd just finished building in 1891. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that some things are worth fighting for, and that family heritage matters more than any developer's profit margin. The whole experience taught me a lot about how vulnerable people can be to schemes like this. Most folks assume that official-looking documents and confident lawyers mean something is legitimate. They don't question whether the signatures are real or whether the legal process was actually followed. And that's what criminals like Stoll and Margaret count on. They exploit people's trust in the system to steal from them. I also learned that good people like Jack and Sheriff Carlson do exist, and they're willing to fight for what's right when someone's been wronged. Without Jack's legal expertise and determination to dig into the fraud, I might have lost everything. Without Carlson and Inspector Flores taking the forgery seriously and investigating properly, the criminals might have gotten away with it. One afternoon, about a year after everything was settled, I was working on fixing a section of fence when a young couple pulled up to my gate. They looked nervous, and the woman was holding a folder. "Can I help you?" I called out. "Are you Peter Whitmore?" the man asked. I felt that familiar tension, wondering if this was more trouble. "Yeah, that's me." "We read about your case in the news," the woman said, "about how the HOA tried to steal your farm. We think something similar is happening to my parents. They have a small ranch about 60 miles from here, and a developer is claiming their property was annexed into a new subdivision HOA. They're threatening foreclosure if my parents don't pay back dues and remove their livestock." I walked over to the gate. "Do your parents have their original deed?" "Yes, and they've owned the property for 30 years. but the developer says the county records show the annexation is legal. Did your parents receive proper notice of any hearings or annexation proceedings? The couple looked at each other. They're not sure. There's a lot of confusing paperwork and they're elderly. The whole thing is really stressing them out. I thought about my great-grandfather, who'd worked this land his whole life and built something to pass down to his family. I thought about all the other victims of Crestview's scheme who'd lost their property before the fraud was exposed, and I made a decision. "Give me your number," I said. "I'll have my attorney, Jack Sorensen, give you a call. He specializes in these kinds of cases now. Tell your parents not to sign anything and not to pay anything until Jack reviews all the documents." The relief on their faces was immediate. "Thank you so much. We didn't know where else to turn." After they left, I called Jack and filled him in. He was immediately interested, especially when I mentioned it sounded similar to what Crestview had tried with me. "There might be copycat scams out there," Jack said. "Or maybe Crestview wasn't the only company running this scheme. I'll talk to the family and see what we're dealing with. Pete, thanks for the referral." "Jack, these developers are targeting families who've been on their land for generations. Folks who work hard and mind their own business. Someone needs to stand up for them." "Agreed, and I'm glad you're helping spread the word. The more people know about these schemes, the harder it is for criminals to get away with them." That conversation led to Jack taking on 3 more cases of suspicious HOA annexations, all involving rural properties being swallowed up by expanding subdivisions. In 2 of the cases, he found clear evidence of fraud similar to what happened to me. In the 3rd, the annexation was technically legal, but the HOA was violating state law in how they were enforcing their rules. Jack won all 3 cases and helped those families protect their land. For me, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that happened. I still run my cattle operation, still fix my own equipment, and still maintain the farm the way my ancestors did. The subdivision next door has grown and developed its own character. Some of the residents have kids who are curious about farm life, and I've let a few of them come help feed the cattle or learn about fixing engines. It's important that the next generation understands where food comes from and the value of working with your hands. Every so often, I'll see an article about HOA overreach or development companies using aggressive tactics to acquire land. Each time, I'm reminded of how close I came to losing everything and how important it was that I fought back. The land patent my great-grandfather received in 1889 saved my farm in 2025, more than a century later. It's a testament to the foresight of the Homestead Act and the protections it provided to settlers willing to work the land. I still keep all the court documents and evidence from the case in a fireproof safe in my house, partly because they're important legal records, but also because they tell a story about standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. If someone ever tries something similar in the future, I want to have everything documented and ready. The new HOA board actually invited me to speak at one of their meetings about a year after the trial. They wanted me to explain what had happened and help educate residents about HOA authority and limitations. I was reluctant at first, but Jack convinced me it was a good idea. Standing in front of a room full of subdivision residents was surreal. These were the same people who'd been told I was a troublemaker bringing down their property values. But I told them the truth about what Margaret and Crestview had tried to do, showed them the evidence of the fraud, and explained how land patents work. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then, someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding. Several people came up afterward to apologize for believing Margaret's lies and to thank me for fighting back. "If they'd gotten away with stealing your farm, they probably would have tried it with other properties too," one man said. "You probably saved a lot of people from being victimized." A woman added, "And you taught us all to question authority and make sure things are legitimate before we trust official-looking documents. That's a valuable lesson." The HOA board president, a retired teacher named Susan Walsh, shook my hand. "Mr. Whitmore, on behalf of the entire community, I want to apologize for what Margaret Henderson put you through. The old board failed in their fiduciary duty to ensure everything was legal and above board. Under my watch, that will never happen again." I appreciated the sentiment, and it did help improve relations with my neighbors. But I also made sure they understood that my property was separate from their HOA and would remain that way. The land patent ensured that no future board could try to annex my farm, no matter how well-intentioned they might be. Jack threw a victory barbecue at his house 6 months after the trial ended, inviting everyone who'd helped with the case. Sheriff Carlson was there, along with Inspector Flores, the forensic document examiner, and several other people who'd contributed to exposing the fraud. It was good to celebrate together and reflect on what we'd accomplished. You know, Pete, your case has had ripples beyond just Montana, Inspector Flores told me over a beer. The FBI is now actively looking for similar schemes in other states. We've found at least a dozen development companies using variations of the same playbook. Your willingness to fight back and expose what happened has helped protect a lot of other people. That made the whole ordeal feel more worthwhile. I hadn't just saved my own farm. I'd helped shine a light on a type of fraud that was victimizing rural property owners across the country. As the sun set that evening, I found myself standing on Jack's deck, looking out at the subdivision and thinking about everything that had happened. My great-grandfather had come to Montana in 1889 with nothing but determination and a willingness to work hard. He'd built something lasting, something worth protecting. And now, more than a century later, that legacy was secure because of a piece of paper signed by President Benjamin Harrison. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the sunset, then sent it to the young couple who'd come to me for help with their parents' ranch. I added a message. "Don't give up. Your family's land is worth fighting for." They replied almost immediately. "Jack is amazing. He found evidence of forged documents in our parents' case, too. Filing charges next week. Thank you for connecting us." I smiled and put my phone away. The fight against corporate greed and fraudulent land grabs wasn't over, but we'd won an important battle. And maybe, just maybe, my story would inspire others to stand up for their rights and protect their property from those who'd try to steal it through legal manipulation. My farm still stands, as it has for over a century. The barn my great-grandfather built still houses my equipment, the cattle still graze on the same pastures, and the land patent, carefully preserved and legally binding, ensures that it will stay that way for generations to come. No HOA, no developer, and no corrupt officials can take that away. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and look at the land stretching out before me. I think about all the work my ancestors put into building this farm, all the challenges they overcame, and all the sacrifices they made. They faced droughts, harsh winters, and economic depressions and countless other obstacles. But they persevered because they believed in the value of owning land and building something to pass down to the next generation. What Margaret Henderson and Crestview Development tried to do wasn't just theft of property. It was an attack on that legacy, on the idea that honest work and rightful ownership mean something. They tried to use legal technicalities and forge documents to erase more than a century of family history. And they nearly succeeded. But they didn't count on the land patent. They didn't count on Jack's legal expertise and determination. They didn't count on law enforcement officers who took fraud seriously and investigated properly. And they definitely didn't count on me being stubborn enough to fight back instead of rolling over. I've learned a lot about the law since this whole thing started. I've learned about allodial title and land patents and the difference between property ownership and HOA jurisdiction. I've learned about document forgery and mail fraud and conspiracy statutes. But most importantly, I've learned that the system, despite its flaws, can still work when good people stand up and demand justice. The check for $2 million changed my life in some ways, but not in others. I'm still the same person, still living in the same farmhouse, still doing the same work. But now I have resources to help others facing similar battles, and I have a responsibility to use those resources wisely. I've started contributing to legal defense funds for rural property owners fighting HOA overreach and development company fraud. I've spoken at several conferences about land patents and property rights, and I've become something of an advocate for reforming laws that allow HOAs to exercise too much power without adequate oversight. Jack jokes that I've become an accidental activist, but I don't see it that way. I'm just someone who fought for what was mine and wants to help others do the same. If sharing my story prevents even one family from losing their land to fraud, then everything I went through was worth it. The Montana countryside is changing. Subdivisions are spreading, developers are buying up land, and the old way of life is slowly disappearing. But there are still families like mine, holding on to their heritage and refusing to be pushed out by those who see land only as a commodity to be exploited for profit. We're the stubborn ones, the holdouts, the people who remember what it took to build something from nothing. My great-grandfather would have been proud of how this turned out. He faced his own battles in his time, fighting weather and disease and economic hardship to keep his farm running. Now, more than a century later, I fought my own battle to keep his legacy alive. And just like him, I won because I refused to give up. The land patent hanging on my wall represents more than just legal protection. It represents the promise that America made to settlers willing to work hard and build a life on the frontier. That promise still matters today, even in a world of HOAs and suburban sprawl and corporate land grabs. It matters because it recognizes that ownership means something, that family legacy means something, and that no amount of legal manipulation should be able to take away what's rightfully yours. As I finish my coffee and watch the last light fade from the sky, I feel a deep sense of contentment. My farm is safe. My legacy is secure. And somewhere out there, other families are learning from my experience and fighting their own battles to protect what's theirs. That's all I can ask for. That's enough.